Welcome on in. It's another episode of NASCAR Coast to Coast presented by Whelen Engineering. On the road, in the air, and around the world, Whelen is trusted to be seen, trusted to be heard, and trusted to perform. Welcome inside the MRN studios here in Concord, North Carolina. I'm MRN pit reporter Chris Wilner. MRN announcer Kyle Rickey out in Connecticut, where things are in the final stages. Kyle, we're coming up on just over a week from the Spring Sizzler out there at Stafford. One of the coolest races, the biggest races of the year up in New England. How excited is your team? I know we talked to Bonza earlier in the week away from the broadcast, and you've been working him like a dog, man. Are you guys excited? You guys getting close?
Yeah, for those that don't know, Bonza Tufa is our digital editor, content creator, kind of a mastermind of a lot of the stuff you see on social media. And yeah, we're getting close. It's also allergy season up here in Connecticut, so we have that to deal with. But the track looks good. All the projects that have been ongoing over the last couple of months are wrapping up. The new grandstands that have been erected off of turn number 4 now have hand railings and fencing around it, which is great. We've had a lot of drivers coming in for their preseason media, headshots and some fun questions for the big screen that we'll put together during the course of the season. So it's as Bonza said the other day, it's getting real, and looks like Mother Nature's going to cooperate this weekend for the open practice session on Saturday, which you can watch live on Facebook, I believe, or at least some of it live on Facebook. And that all leads us up to the Spring Sizzler next week.
Looking forward to it. Can't wait to talk about it more next week leading into race weekend. And I'm glad you guys got those hand railings and fencing around the grandstands, because, when those folks head on over to the Double Hook Bar, for one too many, they may need something to hang on when they get back to their seats. So good on you guys for taking care of the race fans. We got a great show for the folks at home coming up here this week. ARCA gets back onto the big track, Talladega. 61st time the ARCA Menards series hits the high banks out there at Talladega. We'll have an ARCA preview with one of the ARCA Menards series drivers taking part in the race this weekend. Gus Dean, will be chatting with him, one of the Venturini Motorsports drivers this weekend. We'll talk to him about everything ARCA at Talladega, plus his season and maybe what's to come for that driver. We also have plenty of racing to talk about this weekend. We had action at Hickory, Berlin, Jeff Striegel's racetrack, off and running as well up in Michigan, one of the premier racetracks across North America. So we'll talk about that. And hey, we got a big opening weekend for the Madhouse at Bowman Gray, kicking off another year of action-packed action in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. We'll have a look at that, plus much, much more in the world of grassroots racing. But Kyle, let's kick things off with stuff that happened over the weekend that caught your eye. The biggest thing on my radar was Berlin's icebreaker finally getting underway, opening up the 2023 season with a driver who's already been crowned a track champion there, and Evan Shotko taking home the super late model win.
Yeah, a great field of cars, a great crowd. Evan Shotko, class of the field for most of that event. Kudos to General Manager Jeff Striegel, who is also our co-anchor on the NASCAR Cup Series broadcast here on the Motor Racing Network. Has done a spectacular job with that facility. I believe it was $5 to get in if you bought your tickets online, and people responded. The stands were full. The pits were full. The program moved along. From what I saw of their race program, they went from qualifying to and through, I think, 4 or 5 features within 90 minutes. So good for them. The super late models, of course, were last, and even that event was done well before sundown. So it looked like a very successful opening day for a track that has a lot of big events on the schedule. So I know it's always hard for a lot of these facilities that have been, for the most part, cooped up for the better part of 6 months to kind of knock the rust off on their first event of the season. But Berlin did a great job, and it looked like a very successful opening day leading into College Day this Saturday night.
I wonder if my college ID will still work. It doesn't have a date on it, and I still feel like I look pretty young, but I don't know. I'll ask Jeff about it, see if it'll pass. But no, kudos to Jeff for sure. Everyone at Berlin Raceway, I need to get out there for sure at some point this year. But it was an icebreaker event, but that held true because it literally snowed a couple weeks ago, covering the racetrack right after practice for opening weekend. So glad that they had great weather to kick it off. And of course, Jeff knows how to throw a party. So not only was the action on the track great, but of course they had all kinds of stuff for race fans to do outside the racetrack and, of course, surrounding the on-track action. Tim DeVosto was going for a record 104th win in the limited late model. before getting kind of roughed up a little bit. Unfortunately for him, it looked like it was Scott Root and him got together, caused a little drama. There were some interviews, if you were watching on Flow Racing, that were pretty good. So kicking off with a bang for sure out at Berlin. All right, let's move on to Hickory Motor Speedway. Kyle, they're going to be busy. They just were with the Smart Mods this weekend. They've got, of course, the Big Cars Tour race coming up this weekend. But defending series champion Caleb Heddy finally got his first win in 2023. Hadn't been quite the start I know he's wanted, but a good field of cars at one of the oldest weekly tracks on the schedule.
The 29 Southern Modified showed up for the Smart Tour over the weekend, and that's the type of field and the numbers that we have been seeing for the most part this season in the first 5 events. Great fields of cars in a division that a few years ago was struggling to get 20. So a modified resurgence down there, and good to see Tommy Baldwin Racing back in victory lane with Caleb behind the wheel, holding off Carson Lofton, second-generation driver who continues to put good performances together early in the season. Burt Myers, Jonathan Brown, Ryan Newman in the top 5. So not only is it quantity, but it is also quality on the Southern Modified Tour. And I think the opportunity for fans across the country to now watch these races on Flow Racing each and every week is certainly a part of that and that growth that we have seen over the last year. So tight championship battle going into the break. Burt Myers over Brandon Ward, just separated by 2 points. So the Stars are once again going to be running for a Smart Modified championship.
Yeah, and some names in there like Burt Myers also going to be competing at Bowman Gray when they open up again, going for a championship. So the season kicking off in a big way coming up for Bowman Gray, but of course a lot of those drivers already well underway with the Smart Modified Tour. Final big event over the weekend. How about a little combo event, the Pro All-Star Series, Pass Series, and the American Canadian Tour out at the Magic Mile up in your neck of the woods, New Hampshire Motor Speedway. Always special when we get late models and super late models up there at the Magic Mile. Proved to be a great weekend of racing with a guy who's won there a couple times, or at least a few, Eddie McDonald picking up the big pass win, Kyle, and then a good ACT race too as well. So a good doubleheader up there.
Yeah, triple header because the modifieds were on the card as well. I think there was a street stock race. So there were several events for fans to partake in last Saturday, but the headline was the Pro All-Star Series, as you mentioned, a great field of cars, I believe over 30. No surprise, Eddie McDonald has been racing in this part of the country for decades now. Was a part of the old Busch North Series when that series was big up here in New England and did well back then. Fast forward now, 2 or 3 decades later almost, and he is still finding success at a track in which he grew up on. I mean, the Busch North cars raced on New Hampshire Motor Speedway for 4 times a year for the better part of 2 decades. So good for him. Max Cookson finished second. Johnny Clark, another pass regular, has been participating in the Pro All-Star Series since its debut, I think back in 2001. Trevor Sanborn, who won at Thompson a couple of weeks ago, finished in the 4th spot. Justin Larson rounded out the top 5. So great car counts. 27 took the green flag. Derek Luchacki won the ACT race. John McKennedy holding off Anthony Bello in a photo finish in the open modified race. So a great short track weekend at New England's premier speedway, the biggest track that we have in this region of the country, the New Hampshire Motor Speedway, and all the short trackers supported it.
Yeah, and good to see John McKennedy get a modified win. Obviously, we've documented his championship run last year on the national tour and hasn't quite had the success out of the gate this year on that side of things. So maybe picking up an open modified win will kind of spark some things when we get back to the national tour. All right. Well, a lot of things happened over the weekend, of course, and a lot of local racing, like out at Langley and Meridian and a lot of our local tracks, NASCAR roots tracks. But we're going to switch gears and begin to talk ARCA Menards series as they get back underway. Talladega Superspeedway, a part of NASCAR weekend coming up this weekend. We're going to have the driver, the Venturini Motorsports entry, Gus Dean. He's on the line. We're going to chat about his efforts at Talladega and much, much more. Coming up next on NASCAR Coast to Coast, presented by Whelen Engineering.
Whelen Engineering, a global leader in the emergency warning industry, designs and manufactures reliable and powerful warning lights, white illumination lighting, sirens, controllers, and warning systems for the automotive, aviation, and mass notification industries worldwide. Whelen products are designed, sourced, and manufactured in America and tested on site to meet the toughest industry standards. Whelen Engineering, manufactured in America for over 70 years. We never left, and we're here to stay.
Welcome back into NASCAR Coast to Coast, presented by Whelen Engineering on MRN. As promised, joining us via Zoom, Gus Dean, Venturini Motorsports driver, getting ready to tackle the high banks of Talladega coming up this weekend. Gus, appreciate you joining us. It's a tall task when we go from some of our short tracks, and of course, we already ran the ARCA Menards Series at Daytona, but how excited are you to get out to Talladega? Of course, a track you've won at in 2016 with the ARCA Series, but it's been a while. So where's the confidence level going into this weekend?
Very high. The car that we had at Daytona, unfortunately, we had a mechanical failure, but the car itself was extremely fast. It was very easy to manage in the air, and I think we had a really great shot at the victory in Daytona. We just had some mechanical failures, unfortunately, but we were able to end that race with no damage to the car whatsoever. So we had the exact same car going into Talladega. So we know what it's going to do. We know how it's going to behave. I tend to prefer the Superspeedway racing at Talladega over Daytona a little anyway. Obviously, Daytona having its prestige is always going to be one of the greatest victories in motorsports. But Talladega, as far as the racing is concerned, I feel is a little bit more calm. Everybody, there's a lot of guys that they look forward to Daytona all year. Sometimes that's maybe the only race that they run. They really don't have a lot to lose. On top of that, the entire field is also starting fresh with the points. So nobody really has to concern themselves with where they're going to end up in the points at Daytona as much as they would now, a little bit more into the season as we go into Talladega. So I think that'll keep everybody a little bit more calm. And then the racing surface itself is a little bit smoother. The racing lanes are a little bit wider. And again, with the strong car that we had at Daytona, I feel like with my teammates and I all have a very good shot to win Talladega coming up.
You mentioned the teammates. There will be 4 of you out there, and traditionally, that's what it takes to win these races. How key will that be on Saturday with teaming up and hooking up with your Venturini teammates and Jesse Love and Tony Breidinger and Amber Balkin?
I think it's going to be I think that's going to be probably the most valuable asset that we have. Venturini has some of the strongest cars in the field for sure, but where their power truly lies is in our ability to work together as a team, especially a team with that strong of a number going in with 4 cars. Not only does that give us 4 cars to work with off the bat that we know we can trust, ride with, work with the entire race, and not have to worry about, betrayed is a strong word, but when you're super speedway racing, that's sometimes how it feels. So we already start off with those 4 cars. And then to add on to that, when you already have 4 cars that are working together, all 4 happen to be very strong cars at super speedways, now you have other teams and a lot of single car teams who need people to work with. You're going to try to work with the biggest, strongest team. So that gives us a little bit of an advantage over the rest of the field as far as, number one, we have the 4 cars that we're bringing in-house, as well as the people who are going to try to work with us because we already have that strength.
Talladega, I know, and you already kind of described the differences between how it races versus Daytona. But I know, like, at least last year, we were butting up against a time restraint, right? Like, it's a jam-packed Saturday. You have Cup qualifying, and you've got the Xfinity race to follow. Where do you like to run during the race at Talladega, putting yourself in position when you're kind of up against that challenge? If we start having caution after caution, are you somebody that likes to bide their time toward the back and then make your way up front, or do you feel like you have to attack Talladega from the get-go?
I think that's the to be or not to be question of super speedway racing, right? Is do I try to surge my way up front and stay in clean air, or do I get away from the pack and hopefully avoid the big one? In my opinion, I think that has a lot to do with where you start the race. Being that we're going to be starting off of owners' points, I think that puts us 7th going into Talladega. Being that far ahead already, I really feel like trying to stay out front and in clean air is going to be our best bet. If something were to happen and we were to go towards the tail end of the field early in the race, then I might have to look at maybe pulling back and trying to work our way through. Everybody's always going to be a lot more antsy towards the beginning of the race. And as we've seen time and time again at super speedway racing, you can go from the front to the back in half a lap, and you can go from the back to the front in half a lap. So honestly, I think the key really is to just not get freaked out, to remain, keep your calm. And if something were to happen and go to the back, then you have plenty of time to regroup from the back, get another game plan going, and move forward from there. But if you don't have to be put in that position, in my opinion, it's always best to be ahead of the mess.
You won this race in 2016, so you've been around a while. You've been a part of a lot of super speedway racing in the ARCA Menards series, along with some of the NASCAR national divisions as well. But specifically ARCA, has super speedway racing changed in the last, say, 7-8 years? I feel like in Daytona, I noticed you don't have that big 20-30 group pack like we once did. It can thin out fairly quickly, where you have several packs of, say, 5 or 6 cars. And that's why I think we saw some more green flag racing in Daytona. Have you seen that change on the racetrack? And why do you think that is, if you have?
I definitely have. And to be honest, I feel like the main factor in that equation is the body work. When I won in 2016, we were still running the steel bodies. And the differences in the steel bodies and the composite bodies of super speedway racing, honestly, are like 2 separate race cars entirely. They race different, they feel different, they drive different. When you're dealing with that much aerodynamic factor, the shape and overall streamline of the body has an enormous effect on the entire situation that you're in. I think with the steel bodies, you saw that bigger group, number one, because they were much more aerodynamic as far as super speedway racing goes than the composite cars. The composite cars are much closer mimicking the actual street cars that we see on the road every day, which are built, with a downforce in mind to help them through the corners and stuff like that. Where super speedway cars really do not take downforce into account at all. Actually, we try to get rid of as much downforce as we can because we're trying to lighten the cars up. I feel like the steel bodies, being as streamlined as they were, you could move around, you could make a mistake here and there, and you wouldn't be punished nearly as bad because the air didn't have as strong of an effect on the car. Also, you could use the air in different ways. I feel if you go back the 2016 race that I won, we were able to side draft a lot. Side drafting was a huge factor in that race. And actually, at one time when I was on the outside front row, we lost our help from the back, and we were able to maintain that side draft for that half a lap to a lap until we got some help back. Contrary, in the composite cars, they are so much more aerodynamically dependent on the cars in front of you that you really struggle to do that same thing. The side drafting, you do side draft, but you're not going to maintain ground so much on the side draft as you will maybe punish the guy beside you by grabbing onto his right rear quarter panel, let's say, right? Also, they are much less stable in the air, in the dirty air, than the steel body cars were. The steel body cars, when you will get in a big draft pack, 10, 11, 12 cars, you were just as stable in third as you were in 10th. The composite cars, the more the guys ahead of you move around, the more it's going to knock you around. And the further back you go in the field, sometimes the less experience you have. And if you don't have experience with those cars being pushed around at 200 miles an hour, 5 and 6 feet in either direction, it can definitely be troublesome, and you really have to know how to counter that. So I feel like the composite cars offer maybe a little bit more difficult challenge, but for certain a different challenge than the steel body cars would. And I think that's where you really see that change in the style of racing that we have at the super speedways.
I'll tell you what, I had no idea that there was that big of a difference between those two style of cars. So thank you so much for breaking all that down. That makes a lot more sense, I think, for me and Kyle and the folks at home. Let's go back to 2019. You get the call to the Truck Series, Young Motorsports, 15th in points. You get all that NASCAR national experience. And then, unfortunately, you lose your ride. What did you learn, though, from that experience now back in the ARCA Menards series and, of course, accomplished late model racer that you took from that Truck Series experience?
The the trucks themselves they're very similar to normal cars at the short tracks, but at the intermediate tracks, and especially at the super speedways, they take what we were just talking about with the steel bodies and the composite bodies to a whole nother extreme, because you have that really tall front windshield, you have that really flat front bumper, and then you have that really flat deck lid all the way out the back. They are very, very, very aerodynamic dependent, so much so that, when you're out there by yourself, actually it was a really crazy feeling for me as a driver, having never felt it, being out there at the super speedway by myself in a truck, feeling very similar to the composite body cars, because you're wide open and you're holding the wheel primarily pretty straight. And then when the group passed me and I tucked in behind the group, the instant surge of energy that those trucks got once they were out of the air was unlike anything I've seen in any other type of car. There's not a ton that correlates between the trucks and the ARCA cars, in my opinion, as far as the aerodynamics go, just because of how exaggerated the trucks are. But if anything, I can say that I did learn a little bit more about the minute effects of the aerodynamics in the trucks, because it's so much more dependent. Everything is so hyper exaggerated in the trucks as far as aerodynamics are concerned, that you really start to understand why the cars do what they do, in the different style as far as like the actual car goes in ARCA. You might not be able to feel those tiny minute differences because they're much less drastic in a car versus the truck.
Gus, my final question for you, and we're talking about the truck series. You ran full-time a couple of years ago. Is the ultimate goal still maybe to get back to one of NASCAR's national series, particularly the trucks where you have experience in?
Absolutely. Racing is my love. I'm 28 years old, and I've been racing for 24 of those years. So I really don't know any different. COVID was a hard time for all of us, and, we all had to fight through it. And unfortunately, businesses suffered quite a bit throughout COVID, and honestly, their business strategies changed so much, because that was something unprecedented that we've never run into before. That at the time made it a lot harder to sell sponsorship, and that's the name of the game in race cars now, is the sponsorship and having the money behind you to get you there, put you in decent equipment to have a shot at success. But yes, absolutely. If we could find the funding and find the sponsorship, we would love to get back into the national series. And I think I have a little bit left to offer, and a little bit left in the tank. So never know where I'll pop up.
Gus, before I let you go, got to ask you about the rest of your schedule this year. Obviously, Talladega this weekend with Venturini. I know you have limited starts with them. What's the plan for the rest of the year? Are you getting back in any late model races, or kind of what does 2023 look like?
Yes, sir. I love racing my super late model and my pro late model. We are looking into some late model stocks possibly, but we're definitely going to run the late model some more. That's kind of a tentative schedule right now. We really haven't buckled down anything major. That's kind of like a as we go basis. Whenever we can get to the track, we do get to the track. But we will be racing the mega truck a few more times this year, which for those that don't know is like a racing version of monster trucks. They're about 2,500 horsepower. We run on 60-inch V-tread tractor tires, and we jump them about 15, 20 feet, and they're a lot of fun. My dad and I started doing that in the past couple of years. So we're looking to get into that a little bit more, and probably run some more tracks in that as well.
That's awesome. So not only can you drive in circles, you can start jumping people and jumping cars and whoops and things like that. That is so cool. That is so cool. Hey, thanks so much for coming on the show today. Best of luck to you in Talladega. Looking forward to, I'll be down there, so can't wait to watch you out there rolling around the high banks of Talladega. And of course, best of luck on the rest of the season, and much success to you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And thank you guys for having me on. It's been a blast. Venturini Motorsports driver Gus Dean going to take on the high banks of Talladega this weekend, the driver out of Bluffton, South Carolina. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. All right, we still have plenty more coming up on NASCAR Coast to Coast, presented by Whelen Engineering. We're going to take a look at some of the races ahead including we dive deep into Bowman Gray's season opener. That's coming up next on NASCAR Coast to Coast, presented by Whelen Engineering.
Whelen Engineering, a global leader in the emergency warning industry, designs and manufactures reliable and powerful warning lights, white illumination lighting, sirens, controllers, and warning systems for the automotive, aviation, and mass notification industries worldwide. Whelen products are designed, sourced, and manufactured in America and tested on site to meet the toughest industry standards. Whelen Engineering, manufactured in America for over 70 years. We never left, and we're here to stay.
Welcome back into NASCAR Coast to Coast, presented by Whelen Engineering. Just wrapped up our conversation with Gus Dean. Kyle, a lot of intricacies that I had no idea about between steel body cars and composite body and the differences in trucks and ARCA. Gus Dean's got a lot going for him. I think, and like you said, he was good at Daytona, just some mechanical gremlins, maybe a factor in a Venturini car coming up here this weekend at Talladega.
And I think the key is, how will Jesse Love do? Obviously, he is strong on some of the super speedway races and some of the bigger tracks that we've seen ARCA on the last couple of years. Amber Balkin, I believe, led laps in Daytona earlier this year. She's getting more and more comfortable in the draft, as is Tony Breidinger, who's, I believe, has a couple of top 10 finishes on these super speedway races over the last 2 seasons. So if those four can hook up and not make incidental contact and take each other out, I think they're going to be strong. He hit on how fast the cars are, the maturity level of the drivers, the experience level now, a couple of years in for all of them. He's obviously the most veteran of them. So going to be interesting to see how they do and how he does come Saturday afternoon in a race that can be heard right here on the Motor Racing Network.
Yeah, let's dive into it real quick. 61st time we've had ARCA at Talladega. It's the General Tire 200, Saturday at 12:30 Eastern, as Kyle mentioned here on MRN. Greg Van Alst, your point leader, again, won Daytona, been pretty consistent. But then you got Frankie Muniz, second in points for the actor-turned-race car driver. He nearly got a top 10 at Daytona, and he finished inside the top 10 at Phoenix. I mean, are you surprised of how good the season started for Frankie, or not really?
No, driving for a team like Brett Jones Racing, not surprised at all. He's all in. I saw him in the garage at the the season's second race of the year at the Phoenix Raceway, and everybody's trying to get close and take pictures of Malcolm in the middle, and he is literally under the car working on the race car. So he is all in. Has been for several months now, even before the season began at preseason testing in Daytona. So it doesn't surprise me that all of that hard work and dedication to this full-time effort for him is paying off. And I think, we'll be talking a lot about him, at least for the rest of this season. And who knows, maybe this sparks that next step for him into NASCAR's National Series, if he's really serious about making a career out of being a driver.
Absolutely. He'll be a factor for sure coming up on Saturday afternoon. Some other notes to get into with Talladega. Taylor Gray making his super speedway debut in a Joe Gibbs Racing entry. So Taylor Gray, not only, obviously, we know what he did in the ARCA series last year on the east side, as well as some of the national races, but back for the first time this year in a JGR prepared race car, he could be a factor as well. And then NASCAR Whelen Modified Tour superstar Patrick Emmerling is making his ARCA debut as well. So some names in the mix here, Kyle. And then obviously we also want to mention Scott Melton, who was injured in a crash at this race last year, is back in the race car. So we'll see how Scott fares again this week, but lots to keep an eye on here this weekend.
I also want to mention Brett Holmes. Very quietly consistent every time he is in a race car. I feel like second last year in this race at Talladega, third in 2020. So his small family team that won the championship a few years ago remains competitive. Also, Andy Jankowiak, the modified ace that has really taken to these super speedway races for the ARCA Menards series over the last 3 years. 6 top 10s in his ARCA career. Half of them are at either Daytona and Talladega. So just a lot of names, a lot of great stories. Like always in the ARCA Menards series, I believe there's 30 plus drivers entered, 35 cars are entered for Saturday's race. So going to be a fun way to kick off a busy race weekend at Talladega.
Absolutely. Again, 12:30 Eastern on the Motor Racing Network. You can check out coverage of the General Tire 200. Quick news bulletin I thought was cool before we get to some of the races this weekend. How about Tommy Baldwin? Picked up a win as a car owner with Caleb Heddy in the Smart Tour. He was the owner's champion of the Modified Tour, the NASCAR Whelen Modified Tour last year. Now back in the NASCAR ranks as competition director for Rick Ware Racing. Again, remember, he was a part of Tommy Baldwin Racing, of course, as a crew chief up until 2020. When that program went away, then he focused on the Modified Tour, and now he's back in NASCAR. Kyle, couldn't keep him away for that long.
Great opportunity for Tommy to get back into the top level of the sport, maybe help a smaller organization grow, much like what he was doing a decade ago with his Tommy Baldwin racing team, that single car organization that he grew in the NASCAR Cup Series. There are some folks up here in the Northeast that are wondering, okay, now he is now back within a Cup team. How does that affect his modified program? Will we see him as much up here in some of the open modified races and in victory lane at places like Thompson and Stafford and Seekonk, like we have seen over the last 3 or 4 years whenever he kind of jumped headfirst into modified racing or back into modified racing. So we'll see how it affects what happens in this region of the country when he jumps back in full time at the Cup level.
Congratulations, Tommy. Good to see you back in NASCAR. All right, some of the big races coming up this weekend. We teased it at the top of the show, Kyle. Bowman Gray, the Madhouse, kicking off yet another season, a second consecutive year. They've had a repave because we know what happened last year with everybody complaining about that. With the Hayes Jewelers 200 coming up on Saturday, you can watch that race on Flow. What do we think? We've got Tim Brown going for another record with 12 championships. You've got Burt Myers trying to get a rebound. And anything can happen when you talk about Bowman Gray each and every year.
Yeah, and I think Tim Brown is obviously the favorite right now, coming off his 12th championship. That is a track record in the track's 75th anniversary season, or coming into the track's 75th season. So Burt Myers obviously is always good in the extra distance races to kick off the year. So we'll see what happens there. There's also some outsiders in the last decade or so that come in and make a 1 or 2 off deal over the course of the season at Bowman Gray that find success in these 200 lap or 150 lap races like we'll see later in the year. So maybe one of those drivers will get to victory lane. They're expecting about 30 cars around that tight quarter mile. So it's going to be fun to watch on Saturday night. 8 o'clock, I believe, is when the first green flag will wave. Matt Dillner, once again, will lead the broadcast crew on Flow Racing.
That's right. So we'll see what happens here with race number 1 of the season for Bowman Gray. Speaking of good car counts, how about the Cars Tour? Late model stocks, pro late models headed to Hickory. Again, that place has been ultra busy since they opened their doors last month. 41 late model stocks. They're going to have a last chance race because they can't get everybody into the feature. And 29 pro late models. The stars are out for this one. I mean, you name it. Lane Riggs, our national champion from last year, is in it. William Sawalich, Carson Quapple, last year's Cars Tour champion. Connor Hall, Chad McCumbee, the defending winner of the Tough Shed 250. Plus many more involved on the late model stock side. And then, of course, you've got Katie Hettinger, Caden Quapple, Brent Cruz, Gavin Boschel, a couple open wheel dirt guys getting back in the late model ranks, and then Isabella Robusto with Toyota and much more. So, Kyle, Hickory is going to be the place to be. Dale Earnhardt Jr., I think, is planning on being there. Of course, one of the new co-owners of that series. I mean, that's a huge race out there at Hickory this weekend.
I feel like the theme of this show is short track racing, especially on asphalt, is alive and well. We talked about it at the top of the show with the events at New Hampshire and at Berlin and the Smart Modified Tour. Now the Talladega Superspeedway with a great car count for ARCA. Bowman Gray is going to have a great night. And now what seemingly is a record car count for the Cars Tour. I'm not sure if 41 late models is a record, but if it's not, it's pretty darn close. 29 pro late models. So 2 guaranteed full fields. Going to be a great night of short track racing at Hickory Motorspeedway, like you mentioned, kind of a cornerstone stop for the Cars Tour since its inception. They run there multiple times a season. The crowds come out, and going to be a great doubleheader. Can't wait to see some of short track racing's best there in the Southeast go at it at a great facility like Hickory.
Absolutely. And again, it's all leading up to that big race out at North Wilkesboro, part of All-Star Weekend, where we'll have Dale Earnhardt Jr., Kevin Harvick in the field. So exciting things to come for the Cars Tour. A couple other races to keep note of. The Road to the Oxford 250 begins this weekend at Oxford Plains with the Championship Series. and the Pass Series out at Oxford Plains. You've got weekly racing again at Berlin, South Boston, Meridian, much more. And then I'd be remiss not to add in there ARCA West back in action, a late night for those of you with a busy Saturday already between NASCAR action at Talladega, ARCA Menards Series at Curtin County this weekend back in action as well, as Tyler Reif continues to hold that series lead. Sean Hignoraney, who won at Irwindale, is in the field as well, back trying to chase Tyler in the standings. Landon Lewis, the defending winner of that one as well. So, Kyle, if you can't get your fix of short track racing this weekend, I don't know what to tell you.
Just turn on Flow Racing at about noon on Saturday, I feel like, and keep it on through about 2 a.m. because that's when that ARCA Menards West race will probably be wrapping up at Kern County Raceway Park. So a lot of options, and that's not including all the dirt stuff that's happening as well. I know USAC has some big events this weekend with midgets and the sprint cars. So it's that time of the year where there's so much excitement in the air. Everybody's been cooped up all winter, and finally Mother Nature is cooperating. And these racetracks across the country and the sanctioning bodies across the country are opening up shop for the first or second times. And the busy spring season is underway.
Yeah, almost too much to cover, but we try to do it all here on NASCAR Coast to Coast here each and every week. Well, Kyle, coming up this weekend, of course, MRN's coverage at Talladega begins Saturday morning. So have some coffee and race cars with us over the air. We'll be live at 10:30 a.m. Eastern time for NASCAR Cup Series qualifying show, followed by that ARCA Menards Series General Tire 200 at 12:30 Eastern on MRN. And then we wrap up the afternoon into the late afternoon, the 3:30 p.m. Eastern call time for the Ag Pro 300 for the NASCAR Xfinity Series as they take on Talladega. That's all on Saturday. And then we get to Sunday, NASCAR Live Race Day on the Motor Racing Network at 2 p.m. Eastern, leading into the Geico 500 for the Cup Series. Kyle, can't wait to cover all that. But boy, next week, it's all about Stafford and the lead up to the Spring Sizzler. You ready?
I'm ready. 45 teams, I believe, have now entered for the 51st Napa Spring Sizzler weekend. So it's going to be fun. We'll see how many are at the racetrack this week for open practice. We've been visiting shops this week. A lot of those videos will be out here in the next few days and getting a team and driver's perspective on how to attack the 100-lap race next Sunday at Stafford Motor Speedway, and just trying to get into it as a process all in its own. So it's going to be fun.
Awesome. Sounds good. Looking forward to diving into that next week. Of course, we'd like to thank Gus Dean for joining us on the show, and appreciate you folks for tuning in to NASCAR Coast to Coast presented by Whelen Engineering. On the road, in the air, and around the world, Whelen is trusted to be seen, trusted to be heard, and trusted to perform. For Kyle Rickey and our producer, Pat Jaggers, I'm Chris Wilner. We'll see you next week. Lots more to come on NASCAR Coast to Coast. See you then.